The sky was full of fire, smoke, and death. Bright flashes lit the ground as plasma shells exploded across the battlefield. Dirt flew high, machines burned, and soldiers ran for cover. The war on Varela had turned worse in just one day. And now, even the safe zones weren't safe anymore. Corporal Dane Carter dropped behind a broken wall. Breathing hard, his helmet was cracked, his armor covered in dust and blood, not all of it his own. He looked around, searching for movement. The last radio signal from his squad had gone silent. 10 minutes ago, now he was alone, deep in enemy territory, with one mission: survive and get back. But then, something unexpected happened. A sound cut through the chaos. Not a gun, not an explosion. It was soft, weak, almost like a cry. Dane froze, confused. No soldier made a sound like that in battle. He turned toward the sound and crept forward slowly. He passed burning debris, wrecked vehicles, and bodies both human and alien, and then he saw her, under a piece of twisted metal. Half buried in ash, a small alien girl, shaking, covered in scratches, her eyes wide with terror. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, at least in human terms. She had soft lavender skin, her clothes torn, her arms wrapped around herself like she was hiding from the whole world. Dane blinked, confused. This was the middle of a battlefield. What was a child doing here? His cum crackled suddenly, and someone barked his name. "Carter, status report. Are you alive?" He pressed the button on his wrist, whispering, "I found a child." "What?" "Say again," the voice demanded. "I found an alien child. She's not armed. She's terrified," Dane replied, keeping his eyes on her. There was silence for a moment. "Leave her, Carter. We've got no time for aliens." "Child or not," the voice snapped. "But leave her. That's an order." Dane looked at the girl again. She wasn't a soldier, wasn't a threat. Just a scared little thing, alone in hell. Bullets still flew across the distance, but Dane didn't care anymore. He took off his helmet slowly and placed it on the ground to show her he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl flinched, backing deeper under the debris, but she didn't run. Her eyes locked on his face. She looked like she didn't understand his words, but maybe she felt something in his voice, something different from the shouting and screaming around her. He reached into a pouch on his chest and pulled out a water pack. He opened it and took a small sip to show it was safe, then held it out. She didn't move at first. Then, slowly shaking, she reached out and took it. Her tiny hands trembled as she drank. Then she began to cry, quiet, broken sobs that tore at Dane's heart. Dane looked around. The battle was moving away now, the sounds getting more distant, but the danger was far from over. He knew what he had to do. He crouched down, gently lifted the metal off her, and reached for her. "I'm going to carry you, okay," he said. Even if she didn't understand, she hesitated, but didn't resist when he picked her up, wrapping his arms around her small body. She was light and freezing cold. He took his jacket off and wrapped it around her. Then, with her held close to his chest, he began to move. He stayed low, moved fast, cutting through the ruins and smoke. Like a shadow, drones buzzed in the sky, scanning for heat signatures. Dane ducked into a crater and covered her with his own body as one passed overhead. She buried her face in his chest, breathing fast, her hands clutching his armor tightly. He could hear voices in his ear again, his command yelling, his squad warning him. But he shut the cum off. None of it mattered. He only saw her, the terrified child in his arms. Not an enemy, not a target, just a girl who didn't deserve to die in this nightmare, and he had made a choice. He was going to save her. Even if it meant breaking every rule, even if it meant dying out here. He stood up and ran through the smoke, carrying her like she was the most important thing in the world. Bullets flew past him, fires burned around him. But Dane Carter didn't look back, because in that moment, he didn't see the battlefield. He didn't see orders or war. He only saw a child who needed someone to care. Dane stumbled through the smoke-filled alley. His arms wrapped tightly around the small alien girl. Her tiny head rested on his shoulder, and he could feel her fast, frightened breaths against his neck. Her skin was cold and soft, like silk covered in dust. She was shaken badly, but she didn't cry anymore. She was too tired, too weak, and maybe too used to fear. They passed burning metal, shattered glass, and the bodies of fallen soldiers. Dane avoided the open roads, sticking to broken paths and ruins. He knew the patrol drones were scanning for movement. One wrong step and both of them would be marked as threats, but none of that mattered to him now. He had made his choice. He reached a half-destroyed bunker, its roof broken and walls scorched black. Inside, it was dark and quiet. He knelt down, gently setting the girl on a pile of soft sandbags. She didn't resist, just curled into a ball and stared at him with wide violet eyes. She looked exhausted, like her body couldn't take much more. Dane opened his backpack and took out a protein bar and a water pack. He unwrapped the food and broke it into small pieces. "Here," he whispered, placing the pieces in her tiny hands. She looked at him, unsure, then slowly took a bite. Her expression changed just for a moment, like she had forgotten what food tasted like. As she chewed quietly, Dane looked at her closer. She had faint glowing lines on her arms, like soft blue veins that shimmered slightly under her skin. Her eyes weren't like a human's. They were deep and bright, reflecting light like glass. She had no shoes, and her feet were bruised and cut. He pulled out a cloth and gently wiped her feet, then wrapped them in pieces of clean bandage. The girl didn't flinch. She just watched him, silent, like she didn't know how to react to kindness. Suddenly, a voice crackled in his broken cum device. "Corporal Carter, are you alive?" Dane hesitated, then replied quietly, "I'm alive, sir. I have the girl with me." There was a long pause. Then the voice returned, cold and sharp. "That's not your mission, Carter. Drop the asset and return to Point Echo." Now, Dane looked at the child, who had curled up again, holding the half-eaten protein bar like it was treasure. "She's not an asset," he said, his voice low. "She's a child. That's an order, Carter," the voice snapped. But Dane turned the cum off and threw it aside. He wasn't going to leave her. Not now, not ever. He sat beside her and leaned against the wall. His armor was heavy, his body tired. But his mind was clear. This girl, this scared, hungry alien child was worth more than orders or missions. He had seen too many die. Too many innocent lives lost in this never-ending war. He couldn't let her become another number. Hours passed slowly. Outside, the battle seemed to fade. The sounds of gunfire moving to another part of the city. Night fell over the ruins, and the bunker grew colder. Dane took off his jacket and wrapped it around her, keeping her warm. She whispered something then, her first word since he found her. "Shuril," Dane blinked. "Is that your name?" he asked softly. She nodded, eyes shining. "Shuril," he smiled. "I'm Dane," he said, pointing to himself. She repeated it slowly. "Dan." It sounded strange in her voice, but it made his heart ache in a way he couldn't explain. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by a sharp noise outside. Dane stood up, grabbing his rifle. He peeked through a hole in the wall and saw two drones hovering in the distance. They weren't scanning yet, but they were getting closer. He had to move again. Staying here would be suicide. He turned to Shuril, who had sat up, alert but still scared. He knelt beside her. "We have to go," he whispered. "Bad things are coming." She didn't understand the words, but she felt his fear. She nodded, trusting him. Dane lifted her again, wrapping her in his jacket, and slipped into the shadows once more. As they moved through the ruins, Dane kept thinking, why was this girl left behind? Who was she? Why had no one come for her? And why did it feel like she was the only thing that mattered now? He didn't have answers yet, but he knew one thing: he would protect her, no matter what came next, no matter who tried to stop him. Even if the whole galaxy turned against him, he would keep her safe, because he wasn't just a soldier anymore. Not after today. He was something more. he was her protector. The morning sun rose over the ruined city. Ash and smoke still covered the streets like a heavy blanket. But Dane didn't stop walking. With Shurul wrapped in his jacket and clutched gently in his arms, he made his way through broken alleys and twisted metal. She had fallen asleep against his chest, tired from the night. Her soft breathing gave him strength to keep going, even though his legs ached and his side throbbed with pain. After 2 hours of careful travel, Dane finally saw what he was looking for: Outpost Thorn, a small human forward base hidden behind the wreckage of an old train station. It was the closest place where he could find food, medicine, and shelter for Shuril. But he also knew the risks. Outpost Thorn followed strict orders, and those orders did not include saving alien children. He approached slowly, hands raised, calling out, "This is Corporal Dane Carter Friendly, carrying a non-combatant." A spotlight flashed over him, and 2 guards appeared behind a metal gate. Rifles ready, one of them shouted, "Put the package down and step back." Dane frowned. "She's not a package. She's a child. She's hurt." The guards didn't lower their weapons, but after a tense moment, they opened the gate and let him inside. The commander of Outpost Thorn, Sergeant Mears, stood in the middle of the camp with a cold look on his face. He was taller than Dane, older too, and his face showed no kindness. "What is this?" Mears asked, pointing at the girl. "She was alone in the field. I couldn't leave her," Dane replied. "That's not your job," Mears snapped. "She's enemy species, probably carrying tech or diseases." "She's a child," Dane said firmly. "She hasn't even spoken more than one word." Mears leaned closer, looking at Shuril, who had woken and was holding onto Dane tightly. Her large eyes blinked slowly as she stared at the angry man in front of her. "I don't care," Mears growled. "Command says we don't take aliens in, especially not during wartime." Dane looked around, hoping someone else would speak up, but the other soldiers just watched in silence, unsure. Mears stepped forward and reached out to grab Shuril. She screamed and clung tighter to Dane, her body shaking in fear. And in that moment, Dane snapped. He pushed Mears back hard, causing him to stumble. "Don't touch her," Dane warned, his voice low and dangerous. The entire camp went silent. Mears got back on his feet, his eyes burning with anger. "You just assaulted a superior officer," he shouted. "You're finished, Carter." "Then finish me," Dane replied. "But you're not taking her." Mears gave a signal, and 2 guards stepped forward. "Take his weapon, lock him up," he ordered. Dane took a deep breath and backed away, holding Shuril close. "I won't let you have her," he said again, louder this time. The girl was crying now, burying her face in his chest. At that moment, one of the medics, Elsa, stepped in. "Wait," she said, raising a hand. "Let me look at the girl before you make any more mistakes." Mears turned to her sharply. "This is not your call." Elsa ignored him and walked over to Dane. She knelt beside Shuril and looked at her injuries. "She's dehydrated, bruised, and has a fever," she said. "But she's not dangerous." Mears rolled his eyes. "You don't know that." Elsa stood up, her voice calm but strong. "We're soldiers, not monsters," she said. "If you send this child out there, she'd die." Dane looked at her, surprised. He hadn't expected anyone to speak for them. Mears clenched his jaw, thinking. "Fine," he said finally. "She stays for now, but if command finds out, it's on all of you." He stormed off, leaving the rest of the camp in uneasy silence. Elsa led Dane and Shuril into the medic tent and helped lay the girl down on a bed. She handed Dane water and food, and for the first time in days, he sat down and let his guard drop. "Thank you," he said softly. Elsa nodded. "You did the right thing." Dane looked at Shuril, who was now asleep again, her tiny chest rising and falling gently. "She's just a kid," he whispered. "Why do they see her as a threat?" Elsa didn't answer, because deep down, she didn't understand it either. But one thing was clear now: Dane was no longer a regular soldier. He had crossed a line, and soon, command would come for both him and the girl. But he didn't care. He had seen what mattered, not orders, not ranks, just a small, terrified alien girl who needed someone to care. And he had become that someone. Dane knew he couldn't stay at Outpost Thorn for long. Even though Elsa had helped and Shirelle was resting, the other soldiers watched him with cold eyes. Mears had made sure to spread the word Dane was a rule breaker, a man who chose an alien over orders. The walls of the camp felt tight, like a cage. Every hour that passed, Dane expected command to call and order the child taken away. Or worse, destroyed. That night, as wind howled through the broken city, Dane made his choice. He packed rations, water, and a stolen map. He wrapped Shirelle in a warm blanket and carried her quietly past the guards. Elsa was waiting at the side gate, her face pale in the dark. "You're sure about this?" she whispered. Dane nodded. "If I stay, they'll take her, and I can't let that happen." Elsa handed him a small box, med kit, and a fire beacon. "If you ever get hurt bad." "Thank you," Dane said, gripping her hand. Elsa looked at the child and whispered, "Stay safe, little one." Then Dane stepped into the darkness, and the gate closed behind him. The wastelands outside the city were cold and endless. Old buildings stood like bones, hollow and silent. Black sand covered everything, and ash floated through the air like snow. Shirelle clung to Dane as he moved between shadows, staying low and alert. Every sound made him pause. Was it a drone, a soldier, or just the wind? For 2 days they traveled, resting only when needed. Shirelle was growing stronger, and now she whispered soft words in her own language. Sometimes she would hum a quiet tune, and it made Dane smile. It reminded him of Earth lullabies, simple and full of hope. In the quiet of night, he would point at stars and say their names. She would repeat them in her gentle voice. Vega, Sirius, Orion. They became their secret game on the 3rd day. They reached the ruins of an old signal tower. It had fallen sideways, half buried in the dust. But it was shelter, and more important, it had power inside. Dane found a weak energy core still running, just enough to heat the air and charge his wristband scanner. Shirelle curled beside the small heater, and for the first time, she smiled. Not a full smile, but enough to melt something deep inside Dane's heart. That night, while she slept, Dane checked the scanner. He saw movement a drone was following. Their trail. Someone was hunting them, and that meant he had to keep moving. He stood at the doorway of the tower, staring into the black wind. Somewhere out there, someone wanted this little girl gone. But why? She was just a child, quiet, scared, and harmless, unless she wasn't as normal as she looked. The next day, while walking along a broken bridge, Shirelle pointed to the sky. There was a faint glow above them, a ship. Not human, not military. It was silent, and it passed overhead without stopping. But as it moved, Shirelle's skin began to glow softly. Blue lines shimmered across her arms and cheeks, like starlight moving under her skin. Dane stopped, stunned. "Shirelle," he said softly. "What are you?" She looked at him with sad eyes and whispered one word. "Last." He didn't understand at first, but then it hit him. She was the last of her kind. Maybe her people were gone, destroyed in the early days of the war. Maybe that's why no one came for her. But if she was the last, that meant someone might want her dead, to erase the final piece of her race, or worse, to use her. Dane felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just about saving a lost child anymore. It was about protecting something much bigger. He had to get her off this planet, away from the war, away from the people who saw her as nothing but a weapon or a threat. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the valley. The hunter drone. It had found them. It dropped from the sky with red lights flashing. Scanning for targets, Dane grabbed Shirelle and ran for cover. Diving behind a broken metal wall, the drone fired a warning shot, burning the ground just meters from them. Dane raised his rifle and took a shot direct hit, but the drone didn't fall. It turned toward him, charging a plasma beam. Shirelle stood up suddenly and raised her hand. The blue glow from her skin exploded outward, forming a barrier of light that stopped the blast. Dane watched in shock as the drone systems went wild. Spinning, crashing to the ground in flames, silence returned. Shuril stood quietly. Her eyes glowing faintly, Dane walked over and knelt in front of her. "You protected me," he said, amazed. She touched his chest and said softly, "Friend, Dane." Smiled through the fear and wonder. This little girl was more than a survivor. She had power, something ancient and rare. And now more than ever, he knew the truth. If they found her, they would never let her go, but he would never let them. Take her. Not now, not ever. She wasn't just his responsibility anymore. She was his family. The fire from the crashed drone still burned behind them. Dane stood beside the wreck, staring at its broken frame. He could see the human military mark printed on its side. Not alien, not enemy. The drone was one of theirs. Sent not to rescue, but to hunt. He looked at Shuril, who sat nearby under a broken pipe. Her glow had faded now, but her eyes were watching him closely. She looked tired, more tired than any child should ever be. Still, she stayed silent. Still, she trusted him. Dane knelt beside her, checking her. "Hands for burns. Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Good," he said, trying to smile. Though his chest was heavy, she had saved him again. But every time she used her power, she seemed to get weaker. He didn't know how long she could keep going like this. They couldn't hide in the ruins any longer. Dane knew more drones would come. The only choice left was to leave the war zone completely. He opened the map Elsa had given him, fingers tracing the red lines. There was a place, Hollow Ridge, an old emergency medical station, half buried in the mountain rocks. It hadn't been used in years, but if they made it there, maybe he could send out a signal for off-world help, or at least keep her safe a little longer. "Come on," he whispered, lifting her gently. She rested her head against his shoulder. Too weak to walk now, and they moved again, into the wind, into the cold. No clear path, no plan beyond survival. The road to Hollow Ridge was long and rough. Dane pushed through rain and dust, climbed over broken ridges, crossed fallen highways. His boots were torn, his body burned with pain, but he never stopped, because every time he looked down at Shuril, sleeping face, he remembered why he had started. 3 days passed, maybe more. Time lost meaning in the wasteland. Dane's food was running out, his water packs nearly empty. But just when his hope began to break, he saw it. A sharp crack in the hills, metal walls sticking out like bones. Hollow Ridge. Inside the station, the air was dry and stale, but it was safe. The power was low, but still alive. He laid Shuril on an old exam bed, connected a fluid bag to her wrist, and watched the machine blink to life. She didn't open her eyes, but her breathing grew steadier. Dane sank to the floor, exhausted. He had made it. He had kept his promise. Hours later, as he rested, he heard a soft beep signal found. He rushed to the panel and activated the comm unit. It was weak, but it worked. "This is Corporal Dane Carter," he said, his voice cracking. "I have a survivor, non-human child, possibly the last of her kind. Request helper pickup urgent." He repeated it 3 times, then sat back and waited. The reply came 2 hours later. A cold robotic voice spoke from the speaker. "Message received. Response team inbound." Dane felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Help was coming. Maybe this nightmare would end soon. But then another sound. Footsteps, outside. Heavy ones. Dane grabbed his rifle and moved toward the entrance. The door opened slowly, and a tall figure stepped inside. Armor black, helmet mirrored, not human military, private contractor. Behind him were 2 more soldiers, weapons drawn. Dane raised his gun. "Who sent you?" The man spoke with a sharp voice. "We were monitoring the signal channel, and we're here for the asset." "She's not an asset," Dane growled. "She's under human protection." The man stepped forward, calm. "She is worth millions," he said. "What's your price?" Dane's grip tightened. "There is no price." The man sighed and gave a hand signal. The other 2 raised their weapons. "Step aside, soldier. We don't want to kill you." But before anything could happen, a blinding blue light filled the room. The contractors stumbled back as Cheryl stood behind Dane, her small frame glowing like a star. She didn't say a word. She simply lifted her hand. And the air shimmered like a shield. The intruder's weapons powered down. Systems fried. One screamed as his suit locked up. The others ran out of the door in panic. When it was over, Cheryl fell to her knees. Dane caught her before she hit the floor. She was burning with heat, her body shaking. He held her close and whispered, "You're okay now, you're safe." But he knew she wasn't, not yet. People knew she was alive now, and they would keep coming. He gently kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'll protect you, always." Even if it cost him everything. Even if the whole world wanted her. She would never be alone again, because kindness had a price. And Dane had already paid it with his soul. The next morning, Hollow Ridge felt different. The wind had stopped howling, the machines were quiet, and the world outside was still. Dane stood at the doorway, staring out across the gray wasteland. His rifle was on his back, and his eyes were sharp. He knew this calm wouldn't last long. Something was coming. And it wouldn't be friendly inside. Cheryl lay on a medical bed, her small hands folded on her chest. She was resting, but her skin still glowed faintly, like starlight trapped beneath her skin. Dane had given her water, food, and wrapped her in a clean blanket. She hadn't spoken since the night before. Her strength was returning slowly, but something about her still seemed fragile, like she was using all her power to stay awake in this world. And the world kept trying to push her back down. The alert light blinked red on the wall console. Dane checked the monitor. Multiple life forms approaching fast. They weren't drones. These were people, walking, armed, and moving with purpose. Dane counted 6, maybe more. He turned to Cheryl and gently touched her arm. "We have to go," he whispered, but she didn't move. Just opened her eyes and looked at him with tired sadness. He lifted her carefully, wrapped her in a coat, and headed toward the back tunnel. The station had a narrow escape path, old and half collapsed, but still usable. Dane moved fast, staying low, his boots silent on the metal floor. They reached the end of the tunnel and stepped into the open mountain pass. But before they could take 2 steps forward, a loud voice called out, "Stop right there." Dane turned slowly, holding Cheryl close. A group of soldiers stood at the tunnel mouth, weapons aimed, armor black and polished. At the front was Commander Resnick, a name Dane remembered from a long dark mission. Resnick had been known for cleaning up problems, not solving them, and now his cold gray eyes locked on Cheryl like she was a target. "She is not yours," Resnick said, stepping forward. Dane stood his ground. "She's a child," he said. "Not a weapon. Not a tool." Resnick raised a brow. "She is a power source, possibly the last of her species, and property of the Earth Coalition under Code 7X. "Then your code is broken," Dane growled. "Because I don't follow it anymore," Resnick gave a signal. And 2 soldiers moved forward slowly. Dane stepped back, placing his body between them and the girl. He knew he couldn't win this fight with bullets alone. He didn't have enough ammo, or backup, or even a plan. But what he had was purpose. He wasn't going to let them take her. Then something strange happened. The air grew warm, and Cheryl's skin began to shine again. She reached out from behind Dane, her fingers glowing with soft blue light. The soldiers froze, unsure what to do. Resnick raised his weapon, but Cheryl's voice rang out clear and strong. "No more." It was the first time she spoke in perfect English. Her voice was soft but full of power. The ground beneath them trembled lightly. The sky darkened, not from clouds, but from a shadow. Above, everyone looked up. A massive ship, alien and ancient, hovered above the ridge. It made no sound, but its presence was overwhelming. Cheryl stepped out from behind Dane, her body now glowing fully. The ship responded with a beam of light. Stretching down and wrapping her in warmth, Dane stared. Stunned, she looked peaceful, like she belonged to the sky itself. Resnick stepped back, unsure. He barked into his cum. Unknown vessel detected. Request air support. But nothing came, no response, no backup, just silence, because this ship didn't come from any database. Any known fleet. It was older, stronger, and completely outside human control. A figure appeared at the edge of the beam-tall, cloaked in light, eyes glowing with the same blue fire. It knelt before Shirael and spoke a language no one understood. She nodded, then turned back to Dane. Her eyes met his, and she smiled. Tears ran down her cheeks, and she whispered, "Thank you." Dane's throat tightened. He stepped forward, but the beam began to rise, lifting Shirael into the air. She reached for him one last time. He held her hand as long as he could, then let go. The ship vanished silently, like mist blown by wind, and Shirael was gone. The soldiers around him lowered their weapons slowly. No one spoke, no one moved. Commander Resnick stared at the empty sky, his face pale. Without a word, he turned and walked away. His mission failed. Dane stood alone on the ridge, the wind finally returning. He looked up at the stars, knowing she was safe now, far from war, far from fear. And somewhere out there, she would remember him, not as a soldier, not as an enemy, but as the man who saw her when no one else did. The ridge was silent after the alien ship vanished. Ash floated in the air like snow, and the sun peeked through heavy clouds. Dane stood alone, his hand still reaching toward the sky where Shirael had disappeared. His armor was cracked, his boots worn, his eyes tired, but inside his heart, something warm still burned. She was alive, safe, far away from the cruelty of this world. And that was all that mattered. The soldiers behind him slowly walked away. Some were confused, others afraid. Commander Resnick didn't speak a word. He just disappeared into the dust with his men, defeated by something he couldn't fight. Not with guns, not with power. But Dane didn't care about them anymore. He had done what no one else dared to do. He saw a child when others saw a threat, and he chose to protect her. That night, Dane stayed at Hollow Ridge alone. He sat near the old beacon tower, staring at the stars. One of them, maybe, was now Shirael's home. He thought about the way she smiled before she left, the way she held his hand until the very last second. It broke him inside, but it also gave him peace. Days passed. He repaired the signal beacon again, sending out short messages, not to command, not to the military, but to anyone who might care. He told the story of a lost alien girl, the kindness she showed, the power she carried, and how she changed everything. He didn't name himself. He didn't ask for credit. He just told the truth. Weeks later, someone came, not soldiers, not contractors. A group of civilian aid workers arrived in a clean white transport ship. They brought food, medicine, and supplies. They had received the strange message and followed it. They didn't ask many questions. They just helped. Dane gave them the coordinates of the places still filled with children. Alien and human, left behind by war. Places no one talked about. Places like where he found Shirael. He didn't go back to the army. He took off the badge, left the rifle behind, and walked away from the uniform. He traveled from outpost to outpost, from burned village to broken ship. Wherever he went, he helped. Sometimes he found children, lost and scared. Sometimes he found graves. But every time, he remembered her, the small alien girl who whispered friend to him when the world wanted her gone. People started calling him different names. The stray shepherd, the silent walker. But most just called him protector. He didn't speak much, didn't stay long in one place. But when he showed up, people knew something good was about to happen. He never asked for reward, only for food, shelter, and time to rest. One night, years later, he sat by a fire on a lonely mountain ledge. The stars were brighter than ever. He closed his eyes, thinking of her again. He still didn't know what species she was, what her powers really meant, but none of that mattered. She had laughed, she had cried, she had held his hand when he was lost. She had been a child just like any other, and he had been the only one to see that. A small breeze brushed past him, warm and soft. He opened his eyes and saw a tiny glowing feather land on his hand. It shimmered with the same blue light she used to carry. He stared at it, heart pounding, in the sky above. Far higher than any ship should fly, he saw a distant streak of light, silent, graceful, and for a moment he smiled. Somewhere out there, she remembered him. Somewhere out there, the last child of a forgotten world still carried the memory of a human man who said no when the galaxy said yes, who chose kindness over orders, who saw a child instead of a weapon, and who gave up everything just to make sure she could live. And maybe, just maybe, others would learn from that. Maybe one day, when war came again, someone else would remember the story. The story of bullets flying, orders shouting, fire burning, and a man who saw none of it, because all he saw was a terrified alien child. And he chose to be her shield. He chose to be her hope. He chose to be human.